Hey everyone, my name is Danielle D'Amico, and today we are going to present our 611 group project. And we did our project on increasing physical activity through Fitbits. And next, Sarah's going to talk.
Hi guys, my name is Sarah and I'm an RBT.
Maria?
Hi, my name is Maria, and I'm an MBA therapist.
Caitlin?
Hi, my name is Caitlin Fellheiser.
And Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy, and I'm also an RBT in the clinical setting.
All right, now we're going to pull up our group presentation. Okay, so today we are going to talk about our replication of increasing physical activity. And these are our group members. Next. Introduction. So my name is Danielle, and I'm a director of an ABA program at a school for individuals with disabilities and special needs. I'm a BC ABA pursuing my BCBA and Master's in Special Education. We also have Sarah Hillen, who is an RBT therapist pursuing a BCBA and Master in ABA with an emphasis on autism. We also have Caitlin, who is a speech and language pathology assistant pursuing her master's in ABA and a BCBA certification. Maria, who's an ABA therapist pursuing her BCBA and master's in ABA with an emphasis on autism. And Amy, who is an RBT in the clinical setting pursuing her BCBA and master's in ABA with an emphasis in autism. So the purpose of this study was to evaluate the effects of an intervention package that consists of setting goals and providing feedback reinforcement to help increase physical activity to subjects in school during unstructured recess. So in today's society, a lot of people use different tools to increase their physical activity. And during this intervention, we used Fitbits, which were used to increase physical activity in our 5 group members and track the amount of steps taken over time. The intervention was replicated from a research study, and different interventions such as reinforcement, self-monitoring, and peer support were used throughout the process. According to Van Wormer, physical activity has emerged as a public health epidemic. Excuse me. And it was important for our group to find a correlation between increasing physical activity through these interventions. The data taken in this study supported that the intervention used was effective in increasing each group member's step count over 12 consecutive sessions.
So next, we have the methods that we used during this replication study. So as we mentioned previously, the participants in this study were Danielle, Maria, Amy, Caitlin, and Sarah. The materials that we used in this study consisted of a Fitbit, any generation, a second pedometer for reliability, for example, a second Fitbit, a pedometer, an iPhone, an Apple Watch, etc. And also the area to conduct physical activity for 20 minutes per session was required as a material during this replication study. The settings, all participants were located along the East Coast of the United States. All participants agreed to participate in 20 minutes of unstructured or structured physical activity on a daily basis at any time of day for a duration of 12 consecutive days. And finally, each participant engaged in different activities during the 20-minute session. The majority of our participants engaged in either walking on the treadmill, walking around the house, and or doing chores around the house.
Physical activity is defined as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that results in energy expenditure. An example will be walking back and forth down the hallway. And an example would be one's arm twisted when writing a paper. The dependent variable was number of steps taken as recorded by various hardware accelerometer devices such as Fitbit, pedometer, Apple Watch, and iPhone. Before each session, each subject recorded the device's step counter by taking a picture of the current step count. Each subject wore the same primary Fitbit each session, typically on the same wrist. Reliability data were collected by having subjects Sarah, Maria, Danielle, Emmy, and Caitlin, whereas secondary accelerometer device. First subject were a secondary Fitbit. Second subject were an Apple Watch. Third subject was holding an iPhone, and fourth and fifth subjects were a pedometer. Next.
For both baseline and interventions, there were 3 sessions per phase: baseline, intervention, baseline reversal, and final intervention occurred during a 2-week period. The group subjects were allowed to exercise freely. The subjects were allowed to engage in physical activity at any point of the day. For baseline and baseline reversal, the Fitbit was masked so the subjects could not view the step counts. During both phases of baseline group, subjects were not given any feedback. For the intervention and final intervention stages, the Fitbit was unmasked so subjects could be encouraged to look at the Fitbit to increase the number of steps taken. If the group subjects increased their step goal, they were allowed to reinforce themselves with a tangible item, such as a candy bar or etc. During both phases of interventions, group subjects were encouraged to give constructive feedback to their group mates. For our IOA data, IOA meaning inter-observer agreement, we were taking a picture of our steps at the end of each session. Pictures were then sent to the other group mates by text message. By calculating the IOA data, we used a total count IOA in which the smaller frequency count was divided by the larger count and multiplied by 100 to find the IOA. Results for the IOA data for group members was between 20% and 99% for all members across all phases. And then for our treatment integrity, the treatment fidelity was attained through the use of rigorous steps involving reinforcement, self-monitoring, goal setting, and feedback. Fidelity was also conducted through a second step counter to make sure to evaluate accuracy of data. Our next slide shows the results of our averages and our ranges for each group participant. By looking at the graph or the table, you can see that Danielle was the only participant that continued to increase her step count throughout each of the phases. Sarah, Maria, Caitlin, and Amy increased from the initial baseline but decreased in steps when the second baseline started, and then increased again on the final intervention. Danielle has the lowest number of steps throughout all phases, and Amy had the most steps throughout all phases.
So next we're going to talk about our graphs. So this is a group graph with everyone's data. And as you can see, it's across participants. And so it starts with Danielle's graph. And as you can see, it increases. Sarah is a little bit more variable. Amy's has an overall increase. Maria's is a little bit more variable, and Caitlin's graph as well. And so next we're going to talk about our individual graphs. This is my graph, and as you can see, it has an overall increasing trend line. My baseline average was 276, and then my baseline range was 186 to 379. My intervention average was 491. My intervention range was 408 to 556. My baseline reversal average was 499, and my baseline reversal range was 475 to 529. And my intervention average was 608. My intervention 2 average was 572 to 650. And so, like I was saying, it has an overall increasing trend.
For my graph, you can see that mine's a varied graph. For my first phase, my baseline was 709 steps with a baseline of 476 steps to 1,201 step. Intervention 1 had an average of 1,339.67 steps with a range of 407 steps to 2,111 steps. Baseline reversal average was 1,105 steps with a range of 462 steps to 1,790 steps. And intervention 2 had an average of 1,673.67 steps with a range of 1,376 steps to 1,880 steps. So as you could tell, by the end of intervention 2, I had increased my steps.
Next is my graph. As you can see, my data is kind of varied among the baseline phases. In the beginning, my step count was really low, and it increased over time through the first baseline. And in the first intervention, it started up high and ended up decreasing throughout that phase. The second baseline, I started low again, increased, and then it decreased again towards the end. And then the second intervention, it had an increasing trend line. So my baseline average for the first baseline was 1,207 steps, and the range was from 723 to 2,309 steps. Intervention 1 average was 2,318 steps, and the range was between 2,130 to 2,420. The baseline reversal average was 1,732 steps, and the range was 1,590 steps to 2,407 steps. The second intervention average was 2,336 steps, and the range was from 2,210 to 2,590 steps.
This is my graph, and as you can see, overall there is an increased trend. My baseline average is 380 380 steps. My baseline range is 314 to 428. My intervention one average is 1,021 steps. My range was from 977 steps to 1,092 steps. My baseline reversal average was 997.67 steps. And my baseline reversal range was 699 and 1,434. My intervention 2 average was 1,496.67 steps. And my intervention 2 range was 1,070 steps, and the maximum was 1,888 steps. The reason that you see an increase in 9th session and 10th is because I was playing tag with my son, and I think I was treating too much my arm, and that's why you see the 11th and the 12th day and decrease of the numbers of steps.
Here is my graph for steps. Typically, I was walking around the house, maybe cleaning. When I went into the intervention stage, like we had said earlier, in the intervention stage, it was unmasked, so we could see our steps. And for me, I think that helped to increase the number of steps. I could see how many, and we were setting goals for ourselves, and in order to be rewarded, made it so we would work harder to achieve those goals. My baseline was a little high. The average was 889.66 steps, the range being 800 to 29 to 960. I did increase in the first intervention stage. The average was 1,348.33, the range being 1,114 to 1,636. Then when I did the reversal baseline phase, it really decreased even lower than my initial baseline. Like I was talking about earlier, having it masked again, thinking I was getting more steps than I actually was. So that reversal was a little lower, the average 628.67 steps, the range being 434 to 786, again lower than my initial baseline phase. Then in the intervention phase, intervention 2, the Fitbit was unmasked. The average was 1,619.33 steps, and the range being 1,502 to 812. So although my graph varies, my steps did increase from initial baseline when interventions were implemented. As a conclusion, you've heard from each group member, and I think it's important to note that just as the first Hayes study that we looked at and we were replicating, all the participants had different data, different graphs. The intervention affected us all differently. So the total steps for the data for all participants, you've seen, and you can look back on in the slides, the results table provided and the figures. We have our individual graphs as well as a group graph. Overall, all subjects increased their step totals in the intervention phase following the initial baseline phase. All subjects decreased their total step goals in the reversal to baseline phase. So after having the intervention in place and then masking our Fitbits across the board, all of us decreased our step totals. When the intervention was reintroduced, the step totals increased for all subjects. So it wasn't the same for each of us. However, when you look at the individual graphs and the group graphs, you can definitely see an increase once the intervention was reintroduced. These data for all participants suggest that the intervention was successful in increasing physical activity by steps taken during a 20-minute period. It's important to note, as was mentioned before, but we all did the intervention at different times of day. We could pick whatever physical activity we wanted, whether it was walking, playing with children, watering plants, cleaning the house. But all the interventions were able to increase our steps once in place, and then when reversed, steps were decreased during the 20-minute period.
So during this replication process, we came across a few limitations. For example, our first limitation that we came across is that this is a group project and it's worth up to almost half of our grade in this class. So with that being said, all of our group members wanted to excel and get a good grade. So that motivated us to accumulate a lot more steps in a 20-minute session in order to collect sufficient data and hopefully receive a good grade on this project. So another limitation that we came across was that in the original study, the participants were to engage in unstructured physical activity during recess at school. Something that we encountered during this project is that our sessions were either unstructured or structured depending on the individual. So this caused a potential difference in the amount of steps taken per session due to the structure of the session itself. So if the session was 20 minutes long and it was completely structured around physical activity, for example, running on the treadmill, coaching a basketball practice, etc., then there would likely be more steps than other unstructured physical activity sessions completed by other group members. Another limitation that we came across is that in the original study, the data was collected over 20 to 22 sessions. Due to time limitations for this project, we were not able to collect data for that long of a time period. This could make the data collected during the intervention phases less significant due to minimal data being collected in order to show the effect of intervention during the initial intervention and second intervention after the reversal occurred. We did not designate ample amount of time to collect data due to a shorter semester to demonstrate stability during the intervention phases before the phase changes occurred. If we were to do it again, we would give ourselves more time in order to collect more stable data. The next limitation that we encountered was that all of our group members reside in different locations and have varying schedules day to day, person to person. All of our group members did not participate in the 20-minute sessions at the same time of day or together as a group. This could cause various different data based on each participant, based on what they did during the day, during their sessions, how tired they were, what the weather was like outside. That could inhibit their ability to complete the session in an ample amount of time to get an ample amount of data. Another limitation that we came across is that most of our group members use different types of secondary step counters with all different calibrations, from pedometers to Apple Watches to the iPhone, etc. Let's see. This could have caused a potential problem due to the devices calibrating the steps differently if they were worn on different parts of their body. For example, as Maria mentioned, her wrist when she was moving around, it could have detected the information a little bit differently based on the device. If it was more expensive, it could have better data collection based on the price and better quality. One final limitation that we came across is the age of our participants. In the initial study, the age of the participants were 8-year-old students in 3rd grade. All of us are obviously older than 8 years old, and typically as you grow older, you tend to have a little bit less energy than 8-year-olds do. This could create a bigger discrepancy among step counts per session due to having less energy or impending health restrictions.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about our testimonials. So I had a lot of fun with this project. I continue to wear my Fitbit daily and track my steps. I find it very interesting to see how many steps I'm tracking. This project has helped me become more aware of increasing my physical activity throughout the day by making small changes.
Before completing this project, I was wearing a Fitbit on a daily basis. During the project, I became more aware of how many steps I was taking in a 20-minute period. Since completing the project, I continue to be aware of the steps I'm taking during the day and have become more physically active.
Personally, I had not worn my Fitbit in years before starting this project. It has really helped me to be more aware of my steps throughout the day, and it helps me to keep me on track in terms of maintaining or even increasing my daily amount of physical activity. Overall, this replication project has had a very positive impact on the amount of physical activity that we participated in as a group and as individuals. We all had a positive experience, and I've become more aware of the amount of physical activity that we engage in on a daily basis. This concludes our project, and we hope you enjoyed our presentation. Thanks.
Listed here are